When I began taking my first steps on the road to financial independence, things felt like they were moving in slow motion. Even though I was saving and investing my money, my wealth seemed to be growing so slowly. Why was this happening? Where was the magic of compound interest? It took me a while to finally realize what the problem was, and that problem can actually be summed up by just 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, I'd like you to take a moment and try and guess what these 4 lines might represent. Now, it may be obvious that we're looking at a chart here, but within this chart, there's actually a very special place. James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, refers to this special place as the Valley of Disappointment. Now, before I go ahead and reveal all the secrets contained within these 4 lines, I first need to tell you a story. Now, this story may not seem relevant to personal finance at first, but I trust that as it unfolds, the answers will become clear. During the 10-year period between 2007 and 2017, something incredible took place.
At the Olympic velodrome, it's Chris Hoy aiming for a 5th gold medal, and Britain have won a new world record, 42.6 seconds.
The British cycling team won 178 world championships, over 60 Olympic gold medals, and placed first in the Tour de France 5 times. This is widely regarded as the greatest 10-year run in cycling history. But before this period of time, the British cycling team faced nearly 100 years of terrible performance. From 1908 to 2003, they had won just 1 gold medal and had never even placed first in the Tour de France. How did this team go from a century of bad performance all of the sudden to a 10-year span of absolute dominance? This change was actually largely the result of just one man. His name was Dave Brailsford.
He transformed the British Olympic cycling team into probably the best sports team in the world.
Dave was hired as the team's performance director in 2003 and began implementing changes to the team that completely turned around their ability to compete. Naturally, we may assume that Dave must have come in and made some massive sweeping changes to the team, right? Because to go from only 1 gold medal in a century of time to over 60 in just 10 years, that must have required something drastic, right? Interestingly, the reality is Dave made very small changes. Changes that were so small, they only made a 1% difference. Some of these included outlandish sounding ideas such as hiring a surgeon to teach the team the best way to wash their hands to avoid catching a cold, determining the best type of pillow and mattress for each rider to get a good night's sleep, and even painting the inside of the team's truck white so that they could spot little bits of dust that might ever so slightly impair the performance of their bikes. Just 5 years after these 1% changes were made, the team went on to capture 60% of the gold medals available at the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. Suffice to say, these very small changes made a world of difference. But why? How can seemingly so small, ever so marginal changes actually result in a world of difference? Well, the answer to this question is actually contained within the 4 lines that I showed you earlier. You see, we have our first 2 perpendicular lines which represent our axes. On our horizontal axes, we have time. And then on our vertical axes, we have results. Excuse my terrible writing. And then we have our remaining 2 lines which are plotted against our axes. Now, the first line I want to talk about is the linear line. That's the line that just goes straight across. So this line represents linear progression. In other words, we can think of it as if I were to earn $1 more per day, or I were to get 1 more customer for my business, or bike 100 more meters. But this $1 gain never changes. It's a linear progression. It's a straight line. Now our other line, our fourth line, represents something quite different. It represents what is known as an exponential progression. And an exponential progression is quite unique, and that's because for a long period of time, it kind of seems like nothing is really happening. But then after a long enough period of time, a critical moment is reached that this exponential curve actually gets extremely steep and basically looks like it just explodes. Now to tie all of this together, the difference between these two lines results in something called the valley of disappointment. And that occurs in the difference between the linear progression versus the exponential progression. And that's because a lot of the time we conceptualize our own progression, whether it's something like earning more money, growing a business, or getting in shape. We conceptualize it as a linear progression. So in other words, this linear line represents our expectations. But in reality, what actually happens is our progression looks much more like an exponential curve. So the difference between our expectations and reality is this valley of disappointment, because it seems like we're doing all of this work and we're putting in all of this time, but we're not seeing the results that we think we should because we're trying to conceptualize our progression as a linear progression. So this entire time that our expectations are different than reality, we may be disappointed. We may be within this valley of disappointment because we can't see beyond into the future when our actual efforts are going to pay off in a huge explosion of this exponential progression. When we're in the valley of disappointment, little do we know, if only we could see over the lip of this valley, we would see that all of our money saved, all of those late nights working on the business, and every pedal of the bike is all latent potential that is waiting to explode once we've been consistent for a long enough period of time. And then, as you can see, if you're consistent with your efforts long enough, it can get to a point where it vastly exceeds your own expectations. And this exponential curve was the path taken by this British cycling team, and that's what allowed them to have this 10-year run of absolute dominance. And for you, this can be the same path taken by your own personal finances and your own journey to financial independence. Imagine for a moment an ice cube. This ice cube is sitting in a room perfectly cooled to -5 degrees Celsius. But then slowly, the room begins to heat up. -4 degrees, -3 degrees, -2 degrees, -1 degree. The temperature has clearly changed, but the ice cube hasn't. How can progress be made here, but no results are showing for it? It's because there's 1 degree left to change, but that 1 degree will make all the difference. As -1 changes to 0 degrees, all of the real change finally unfolds as the ice cube begins to melt completely. You see, these large breakthrough moments are usually actually the result of all of these small marginal changes that were made beforehand leading up to this big breakthrough moment. Bamboo spends the first 5 years of its life seemingly not growing as it builds extensive root systems underground, but then it explodes 90 feet into the air in a matter of only weeks. When it comes to finances, it's no different. I mean, when I first started out saving and investing my money, I was pretty disappointed, and that's because it didn't really seem like anything was happening. I was imagining that it would be a linear progression where I could clearly see that my money was growing in this nice straight line. But what really happened is almost nothing happened for a long period of time. It takes a while for that latent potential of compound interest to actually start becoming noticeable, because for a long period of time, you're within that valley of disappointment on the exponential curve. But it's not actually that nothing is happening during this time, because all your work and all your saving and discipline is actually just being stored as this potential where if you don't quit and you don't give up, all that stored energy is actually just going to fuel that rocket ship later on. I mean, it's clear to see when you look at a chart like this. Investing $500 per month into the stock market, assuming a return of 7% per year, makes it look like you're not earning much interest, even up to about the 7-year mark. That's a lot of time to be working at something for what seems like a small reward. But if we look past the 7-year mark, the amount of interest we earn steadily curves upwards and upwards like a rocket ship blasting off. This breakthrough moment and all that massive money coming to us later on will not be possible if we don't first put in this work in the beginning, these small marginal changes and gains and discipline and all that work. It won't be possible if we first move through this valley of disappointment and stay committed to seeing our goal to the end. And so if you're watching this and you're just starting to get your finances together and maybe you find yourself in this valley of disappointment because it seems like nothing is happening, don't stop. Don't change direction. You need to keep moving through it and just have that faith that on the other side of this valley, you're going to reach your goal. You never know when that breakthrough moment is going to be waiting for you just beyond the horizon. This has been one of my favorite ways to think about investing in the stock market, starting a business, or even the journey to financial independence, and I really hope that it was interesting for you too. And if it was, I'd ask you to consider subscribing to my channel Cash College because I'd love to have you join this community that we're all building together. And with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.